Today, the subcommittee will focus on how Apple effectively shifts billions of dollars in profits offshore, profits that under one section of the tax code should nonetheless be subject to U.S. taxes, but through a complex process avoids those taxes.
It's completely outrageous that Apple has not only dodged full payment of U.S. taxes, but it's managed to evade paying taxes around the world through its convoluted and pernicious strategies.
America remains the land of opportunity, where anybody can start a company and then reap the benefits of working in the American financial system. It involves capitalism, entrepreneurism, working hard to succeed, and then getting hammered by the Internal Revenue Service along with more taxes than anything Caligula might have thought of. Welcome to the new American corporate plan, and welcome back to MidPoint. Welcome into MidPoint, the senior economic consultant for Euro-Pacific Capital and an expert on international finance. John Browne joins us in the studio today. John, thanks for being here.
Good, very good to be here, Ed. Thank you.
Is this really anything new? American companies trying everything they possibly can to go any place they can in order to save being taxed by the Americans?
Well, it's relatively new. It started in about 1982. I mean, when American taxes really got bad relative to the rest of the world. When, after 1971, when Nixon broke the last link of gold to the US dollar, you then got the world's second great inflation. And then a whole series of Democrat governments and pseudo-Republican governments, other than Reagan, but a lot of spending, and therefore big government creeping in, more and more intrusive, costs a lot of money. And so they want more and more taxes. So companies started to make use of the provisions of the US tax code, which, like a lot of exporting countries, encouraged people to be doing business abroad. And one of the rewards was that if you make profits abroad out of other economies, you can keep the money there and then spend it locally on building plant and things like that, instead of bringing it back, getting it taxed, and then having to export it again. And that was pretty reasonable. That was called parking. And the other thing was that if you had more than 25% of the equity of the company was owned abroad, you could actually domicile the country abroad for tax purposes. And that was called inversion. And so as tax rates really grow in America, especially under Obama, with 20 new taxes in Obamacare alone, people have got more and more aggressive. And I mean, Pfizer's bid of over $100 billion for AstraZeneca in England, in Ireland rather, will save them roughly $4 billion a year.
Is it fair to say that certainly the tax code has allowed these companies to do that? You just seem to indicate that there are all sorts of little mechanisms in the tax code that not only allow it, but basically push people towards going elsewhere.
Yes, I don't remember talking to people in the days when it happened, but it certainly allows it. And it most probably was because the politicians wanted to encourage American businesses to spread out, to go abroad, to build plant abroad, to boost American exports and things like that. And now, of course, America has an effective tax rate for corporations of 40%. Well, the world's average is around 23%, the global average. And Britain, for example, has dropped its tax rate from 30% to 21%, 21.6%. Switzerland about 17%. Ireland right down to 12.5%. And so there are huge differentials. I mean, what companies save, big companies, is massive. For each percentage point, Pfizer will save 200 million for every percentage point less tax. And so these are not tax havens like Bermuda or Cayman or something like that, which have zero tax, because there are other things besides tax that are important. Patent protection, physical protection, police, law and order, a legal system that really is very good, and these sort of things are all taken into account, and the local market. So it's really having the highest tax rate in the world at 40% is making American business extremely uncompetitive for actually earning money as opposed to printing it and creating it with a computer. And we've just heard two politicians, one Democrat and one Republican. I mean, I just can't believe my ears, particularly the Republican. All they want is more money off you and me and everything we have to do with companies.
All right, now let's look at where we go from here. It would seem as if the United States has basically opened the door on this one, said go ahead and do it. As to why they're doing this now, why this is all of a sudden becoming news, you mentioned Obamacare. Was that sort of the spark that made these companies think, this is way too much now and we have to do something now?
Yes, I think you're right, Ed. I mean, if I were a director of an international company based in the United States but with wide operations overseas, with all these new taxes and the new mandates yet to come, being delayed illegally by the president.
There's still more to come, which the companies are still concerned about.
Yeah, and so I think, why do I pay all this stuff here when I'm earning money abroad and I can earn money abroad? Why don't I do perfectly legally what I'm allowed to do, either park my overseas profits abroad and leave them there, like Apple has done, perfectly legally, or have an inversion and buy another company which will then form more than 25% of my equity, and legally domicile for tax purposes in a less onerous, a perfectly fair but less onerous tax regime, rather than this outrageous. I mean, you know, America was freedom and enterprise, and it's rapidly becoming the reverse. And enterprise is dropping, and the Fed keeps pumping more money in, created out of nowhere, and wonders why enterprise doesn't take off.
Got about a minute or so left here. So instead of just the politicians sitting there and pontificating, what else are they looking to do? What can they do at this point to stop what they themselves started?
Oh, absolutely. There are two overriding factors which would sort America out completely. One is to have a flat tax and no loopholes whatsoever, but a flat tax. And secondly is to have single-term politicians. So you get rid of these careerists who are in there just to be re-elected. Populists, they'd be in there out of duty, and I would frankly halve the pay and allowances for all of Congress and even the running of Congress. Why do we need inch-and-a-half hitch carpets everywhere when there are perfectly adequate oak floorboards underneath? I mean, all these great extravagances, they line themselves in great glory, and you and I and every corporation in America suffers for it.
I'm writing this down. Hold on a sec. I want to get down to carpet, and I want to get, get down to everything else that they're going on.
The pay is so enormous that they have a retirement policy that gives them full pay for the rest of their lives in retirement. What does the average American get? A pittance compared to that.
John, unfortunately, we are all out of time, but we're going to have you back. We need to put a list together here, and we're going to start going after the politicians on this. You and I will never escape taxes again as long as we possibly live. We better be careful of the IRS from here. John,
I don't want to escape if it's 25%.
If it's 25%, it's easy. You're right about that. Okay. Coming next up, to some it may have seemed like a bad movie, but let's be serious for a moment. What happened in Stockton, California Wednesday was all too real. It is the subject of today's news call as MidPoint continues, where we question everything.